Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first Torah class of 5785. And I want to start off with something totally different that we've never done before. For a few minutes, and you'll let me know if you like it, if you enjoy it, before every class. There's a beautiful, beautiful book called Gate of Trust, Shar Habitachan. It is a fascinating book called Duties of the Heart. Now, when we talk about Jewish life, we talk about the mitzvahs, the different mitzvahs that we do, prayer and mezuzah and kosher and Shabbos, 613 mitzvahs. But many, many times we fail to analyze the emotional element of Judaism in our lives. Because there's a very important having a sync between your intellect, your actions, and your emotions. And this book, Gate of Trust, addresses a very fundamental foundation of Jewish life that even myself, this is something I recently started to study because my husband bought this book, and my husband told me, my husband's Rabbi Hecht, that my father was once told by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to study this book called Gate of Trust. So I'm going to actually advise everybody to purchase this book, because once we go into it, you'll understand why I want to use our class 5 to 10 minutes to share something from this book, which is in, by the way, Hebrew and English, originally written in Arabic and then translated. What? And written by Rabbeinu Bachai ibn Pekuda. Now, what is this book about? Let me give you a very brief introduction. It is about trusting God. Now, I'm going to pose a question to all of you. What's the difference between faith, belief in God, and trust in God? Who wants to share their insight? Isn't it the same thing? And if you believe in God, do you trust God? And if you trust God, do you believe in God? Does it go both ways? Does it go one way? What are your thoughts? And you don't have to be scared. No answer can be incorrect. I mean, it could be incorrect, but, it's a discussion. Does anybody want to offer any insights?
I don't know. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that some people follow faith blindly.
Okay.
God means you're not blind, you're aware, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, good. Interesting. Anybody else want to share anything? So, okay, go ahead.
With trust, you trust that God will do the right thing or do the best thing for you, or there are different kinds of trust.
Beautiful. Excellent. Very good.
So whereas faith is the existence, but you haven't gone farther than that.
Excellent. Margaret, you can take over the class officially. Okay. So exactly what Rabbeinu Bachai explains in the introduction, that faith in God is what Margaret said. You know God exists. You believe in a creator. Trust is a much deeper, deeper connection and level. Because you might believe in God, but do you believe and trust that every single second of your life, everything that happens in your life, whether we perceive it as good or we perceive it as not good, is because God wanted it that way? Now, let's use an analogy of a tree. Belief, emunah, belief that there's a God, faith is like a tree. Now, not all trees bear fruit, but you cannot have fruit without a tree. So trust in God is the fruit. Belief and faith in God is the tree. So you can go through your whole life believing there's a creator, believing there's a God. You're God-fearing. But not necessarily does it permeate your every minute of your life. And you say, this happened because God meant this to happen. I trust in God that this is the way it's supposed to be. And I'll share some examples in a second. So again, you could have belief, that's a tree, but not always does it bear fruit. Fruit of a tree is trust in God. There's something positive that comes out of your faith and belief in a God. Now, why is this so important? Why, I might say, why did I feel that we should be spending every class 5 to 10 minutes on this topic? Because I want you to think for a minute in your life, because I feel this very much resonates to me. How many of you wake up in the morning or go through your day and you're worrying about something? Okay, can you relate to that? Magnesium 101, to de-stress you. And you have anxiety. How many of you have anxiety? How many of us have anxiety over different things in our lives, right? We all go through life worrying, anxious, anxiety. When I started to study this book before the summer, I felt so many times that slowly but surely it is minimizing worry and anxiety, because what you're essentially doing is realizing that we don't run the world, God runs the world. And sometimes if you're a type A personality, like I am, and you think that everything happens because you didn't do what you should have done, or you could have done something differently, it's so much easier sometimes to put down the burden, put down the package, and say, you know, God meant this to happen this way at this time. And even if I would have chosen a different road or made a different decision, it had to happen because God wanted it to happen this way. Trust is, or you might say, it's taking away my independence. Quite the contrary. It's giving you your independence because you're realizing that God runs the world. But Rabbeinu Bachai says something very interesting, that if you decide that you want to be independent and rely on your own, everything is really you're running the world, and God says, go ahead. You like running the world, go ahead. And God takes a step back and allows you, in a sense, to stumble, fall, and do. And then you might ultimately come to the conclusion it was a little better when I relied on God. So this is just an opening taster of what this book, The Gate of Trust, opens up the doors and discusses with us why. First of all, why should you have trust in God? The benefits of trusting in God, and so on and so forth. This is what this book, Shar HaBitachon, will open up the doors. You know, we have an expression, money can't buy happiness, right? But guess what? A dollar bill can buy happiness. You know how? What does it say on the dollar bill?
In God we trust.
In God we trust. There you go. So in this case, a dollar bill can buy your happiness. Because in essence, trust in God brings you joy and happiness. If you look at the word joy, I thought of something. Joy. What other word is in joy? The Yiddish expression.
Oi.
So we want to take I and turn it into joy. A Yiddish accent.
She speaks fluent Yiddish, of course, and Hebrew.
So, you know, trust is an art. This is a lifelong journey. As I've started to study this book,
Your brothers.
first I thought you could read it because it's English, but it's not so simple. It's English, but it's Hebrew English, but it's not so simple. It took me a long time to understand the difference between faith and trust till I was listening to a lecture and a rabbi, Shaus Taib, describes it. He says it's like a tree with a fruit. So once I heard that analogy, I understood what it meant. I couldn't understand what's the difference. If you believe in God, don't you trust in God? And if you trust in God, don't you believe in God? Is it one go with the other? So it takes time to digest the concept of trust and also to integrate it. It's not so easy to relinquish your power in your sense and your feeling of independence that I am running the universe and I am the decision maker and so on. It's sometimes very difficult to acknowledge that, guess what? There's a higher power. And when you let go, you feel so much better. You feel so much better. There's a story of a guy, a poor fellow was traveling on the road. He couldn't afford a horse and buggy, and he's schlepping all of his boxes. And a fellow passes by and has pity on the guy. He says, "Come, I'll give you a lift. Come onto my wagon." So he takes his 10 boxes, he puts it on the wagon, and he's holding them on his lap. And finally, the driver says to him, "Dear sir, you could put your boxes down." He says, "Oh, you mean I don't have to hold on to them anymore?" He says, "No, you're on a wagon." So it's an analogy that we fail to realize that when we trust in God, we can put down our packages. The wagon can carry you and your packages. You don't have to hold on to them. When you trust in God, you don't have to hold on to your baggage. You can let go now. There's a greater power. There's a mighty God who can help you carry your packages now. So if you try to integrate that line of thinking, that line of thought, it kind of feels a sense of relief in a way. I hope you agree with me on that sometimes when you realize somebody is carrying or something is carrying it with you, it's so much more relaxing. Thank God that now I realize by having trust in God, it's not more challenging. I'm not relinquishing my power, my independence. I'm now allowing God to run the world as it was meant to run. And in the weeks, we'll discuss, why did God set up the world this way? That we have to earn a living, we have choices to make. If God was running the world, why not just let us sit on the, when you go to the airport, there's a walkway where you just stand there with your luggage and it just leaves you. Why not just make the world a walkway? Good morning, Barbara.
Good
Why
morning.
not make it a walkway of life? Why make challenges and choices have us go or have to make earning a living, which is one of the biggest stresses and anxiety people have? How am I going to make a living? How am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to work on my investments? It's one of the biggest anxiety inducers in the universe, is how to make money. And did I make money? And will I lose money? And so on. It's human nature. So this is what the Gate of Trust will be discussing in the coming weeks, and we're going to do a little bit each week. And if you enjoy it, we could do more of it and so on. But it's really, really very fascinating and interesting. Go ahead, Diane. Anybody have any questions?
I found it on Amazon. It's a white cover with Hebrew letters.
Yes,
The R Habit Tachon with commentary. Is that it?
yes, the Felig edition. The Felig edition.
The Felig edition. Let
Yeah.
me see.
The Felig. He sponsored, this wealthy businessman from Florida, sponsored the translation with commentary from the Rebbe, from the Talmud, on this great work by Rabbeinu Bechaya Ibn Pekuda.
There's so many choices here. All right.
All right, you know what? After the class, I'll send out a link to everyone to this particular volume. It's a very
that's
good
it.
volume.
I see the book. Okay,
Yeah,
that's what
this
it is.
is it.
Okay.
I wanted everyone to see it.
Good.
I wanted it to see it. I want to end off with one more little point, and then we're going to go into the parsha. And there's something that's going to tie in actually to the opening of the Gates of Trust. So in the book of Mishlei, written by King Solomon, the wisest of all men, he says, we all have anxiety. We all worry. It's human nature. So he writes, Daga belev ish yashchena. What do you do when you worry? What do you do when you have anxiety? Yashchena, he says. What's the advice King Solomon says? Cast it away. Now, is it easy to cast away worry and anxiety? Did you ever crawl into bed at night and the anxiety and worrying hits you because that's when your mind kind of rests? Can you cast it away? So he gives a second explanation. Yashchena doesn't only mean cast away. It means articulate it. Articulate it. which means find someone, and it has to be someone who feels for you, someone who cares about you, and share your anxiety, share your worry. Use a sounding board. Because sometimes when you talk it out with somebody and they say, A, B, and C, and you say, you're right, I never looked at it that way. And when you talk it out with somebody who loves you and cares about you, a friend, a relative, a spouse, a coworker, you articulate it, it helps you cast it away. It helps you, it minimizes it, or it comes to some resolution. And we always have to replace negative thoughts with positive thoughts. You know what they say, an empty can with one coin makes a lot of noise, but if the can is full of coins, it is hardly any noise. So when you fill your thoughts with positive instead of negative, it's another way of reducing worry and anxiety. So these are the kind of ideas, which are really very practical, by the way. This is not esoteric. So the book Gate of Trust, Shar B'Tachon, Duties of the Heart, is not a philosophical book, by the way. It's a practical book of how to train yourself to trust in God. So you're not going to get like, oh, you know how I love philosophy and I love Kabbalah, which we're going to do in a few minutes. But this is really very practical. Simple, but practical. And also very enlightening. It really transformative. I can't say that my whole life has been transformed yet, but I see small changes happening in myself. I see it with things where I would go ballistic. And I'm like, oh, okay. Let's see what God intended over here. I start analyzing. What does God really want over here in this scenario? I want to share a little story that happened in Israel now about faith. I don't know if you remember, trust. I remember the terrible story in Miran when they went there for the yard site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Remember, all the bleachers collapsed and people couldn't get out.
Yes,
and
yes.
young people were killed. And a parent lost two sons.
Oh,
And by Shiva, he said to people who visited him, he says, I'm praying to God every day. You took away my two sons, but don't take away my trust in you. Don't take away my bitachon, which means trust. Because without trust in God, without my faith in you, I can't survive the rest of my life. One thing, God took away his children is horrific. But he said, but God, please, please, I pray, don't take away my trust, because that's all I have to hold on to. This is what it is, that in times of immense tragedy, now you can't go into Shiva and say to someone, oh, you should trust in God. That's not for you to say. It's for the person to come to their own conclusion. It's for the person to come to that level. But for you to preach to someone, that's not what Rabbeinu Bachai is saying. Rabbeinu Bachai is not telling you to go around telling everybody how they have to trust in God. You understand the differentiation here? But here you see a person who's worked on himself. For him to be able to say that in Shiva is like mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Like somebody once asked me, Freida, what happens if you realize that everything you've taught and everything you've learned and God's existence is a hoax? What are you going to do? She asked me. She considers herself an atheist. And I'm like, you know what? At least I was able to have something to hold on to my entire life. Better than the opposite. At least you have something to hold on to. I said, how did people survive COVID? How do people survive COVID if they didn't know that God had a divine plan? Then it's almost like you're falling off the cliff. It's only because you believe in God that you say, you know what, there must be some reason. We don't know the reason. It might be beyond our understanding, obviously, but at least you have something to hold on to. Imagine someone who has nothing to hold on to. How do you survive catastrophe, killings, wars, what's going on in Israel and the world over? How do you survive if you don't believe that there is a bigger picture and a reason and a rhyme in the universe. I can't imagine how I could survive. I most probably would be crawled under in a cave, wrapped up in a blanket, and not be able to get out. That's how I feel. I would feel if I didn't know that there was a broader reason, and God is the orchestrator of the universe. So you go ahead, Diane. Yes.
So what do you say? How do we figure out the balance between doing things that God has sent to help ourselves? You know, the story of the rabbi sent a helicopter, a boat, you know, the guy, you know, we can't just sit idle. I understand what you're saying, but how do you find the balance?
Very good. Because that's what I also said that we're going to discuss in the coming weeks. If God meant us, if everything is in God's hands and everything is predetermined, why aren't we just sitting at the dining room table sipping tea? And so in the coming weeks, we're going to discuss how the natural order of life is to go through life and do what we have to do. Because doing that also puts yourself in God's hand. Listen, I'm going to do whatever I have to do. I'm going to raise my children. I'm going to go to work and make money because I need to pay my bills. I'm going to do kindness and goodness and mitzvahs because it says it in the Torah. And that's why also we don't know the day. Rabbi Bechai mentions we don't know the day we're going to die. Could you imagine? Then you'd really be sitting around waiting, right? So life's future is hidden from us. We have to do what we have to do and let God do what God has to do. But also, you know what? You realize also that, you know, you become more open to the helicopter, the rowboat, and the joke. You know, the guy is in a hurricane. Just very briefly, everybody knows this joke. The guy is stuck in a storm. So they say evacuate. He says, God will save me. He's not evacuating. So the truck, the police cruiser comes quickly, get into the car. God will save me. By now the water is on the second floor. He jumps to the second floor and a rowboat comes by. Quickly, sir, jump into the rowboat. You're going to drown. God will save me. By now the water has covered the house. He's on the rooftop and a helicopter comes, throws down the ladder, says, quick, sir, grab the ladder. We're going to save you. God will save me. You know what happens? He ends up in the heavenly spheres. He's gone. He comes to God, why didn't you save me? I was such a God-fearing person. I trusted in you. God said, what do you mean? I sent a cruiser. I sent a helicopter. What do you mean? So when you have a relationship with God and your soul, you're open to the possibilities. You realize things. You like look at the world like, you know, if person, I saw a very, very heart-wrenching video, but also very happy of a child that was born blind. And they did a surgery and they put on the glasses and they show how this 6-month-old child sees his parents for the first time. And the kid sees his parents and he cries and he laughs. He doesn't know what to do because he's never seen. He doesn't know what to make of the objects in front of him. That's what happens when you study Torah, when you study a book, Gate of Trust, Divine Duties of the Heart. The world opens up. You start seeing things differently. Before you didn't realize the helicopter was there for you. You said, God will save me. God is saving you. So there's a healthy balance, Diane, between protecting your life, defending your life, living your life, but realizing there's a big picture and God is in the picture. That's how I would sum it up right now. Does anybody want to say anything, add anything, complain? Say it's a hoax. So that for today, we'll conclude with the Gate of Trust, Shar HaBitachon. It's a little bit something to digest. And now I want to go into the Torah portion. But I also want to do a different twist today as well, leading on to the fact that we opened up with how to live your life with more trust and then, of course, more faith, because it's all interconnected. So you know that when you read the Torah portion every week, and Shabbat, and then Mondays and Thursdays, you divvy it up. There's also something called, what do we read after the Torah portion? Who knows?
Haftorah.
Haftorah. What does Haftorah mean? It comes from the word,
After? Yeah.
go ahead,
Before and after? I don't know.
possibly. So Torah means, anybody know what the word Torah means?
Instruction.
Instruction, hora'ah, very good. Lessons. Mora, like a mora teacher, hara. Haftorah comes from the word potter. You're potter from something. You've been, let me try to remember the English word for exempt. So what's the story of the Haftorah? If we have a Torah reading every week, what's the Haftorah? Anybody know the history of the Haftorah? Where did it come from? Why do we have it? And it's always from the books of the prophets.
It comes from the Greek invasion in Israel, and they were trying to push down the Hellenistic thought, and it became illegal to study the Torah.
Very
Although
good.
They did it anyway, but good for them. But they also that's when they started studying the prophets and other readings to complement it when they couldn't actually have a Torah scroll out and obvious.
Very good. So what happened was when the Romans destroyed the second Beis Hamikdash, the second temple, they thought that's the end of the Jews. Finito petito. You see, the Jews are flourishing. There's no knocking them down. So they realize it's Torah study. The Jews are not bound to real estate. The Jews are not bound to the Holy Temple. The identity and the force life of Jews is not only a building, there's a Torah. And the Torah is wherever you are. They say, where do you find Judy? Where do you find God? So they say in the synagogue, in the temple, by the rabbi's house. No, in you. So they realize there must be something keeping the Jews going, the Torah. So they said, no more Torah study, punishable by death. So the great sages came up with a alternative called Haftorah, where they gleaned from the books of the prophets something that was connected to the Torah portion. And I'll share a few examples in a second. And from that, they read from the book of the prophets somehow, some way that it was connected to the Torah portion. That's how they did it. Now, when Jews were free again to read Torah, right? Every Shabbos and every weekday, Mondays and Thursdays, you don't abolish a wonderful tradition. You keep a wonderful tradition. So the tradition continued where we read Haftorah. With a break, we say Kaddish, and then we read Haftorah. So it differentiates between the Torah reading and the Haftorah reading. So every time you read a Haftorah, it's a connection somehow to something from the Torah portion. So today I want to share the Haftorah of Vayera. We started with Genesis, then we have Lech Lecha, and now it's the Parsha of Vayera, where God appears to Abraham in the story of the three angels, and I'll go to that in a minute. But I want to start with the story of the Haftorah. And it is a very, very beautiful story of Elisha the prophet. Elisha the prophet, 663 BCE, was the disciple of the famous prophet, who knows? Elijah. And it says that Elisha had double the prophecy of Elijah. He was given double the prophecy, and there's many unbelievable stories with Elisha the prophet, and one of them I'm going to share this morning. So the story goes like this in the Haftorah. Give me 1 second. I want to bring up something very important. I just want to find where I wrote it. With my notes, I have so many notes. Every time I see something interesting, I write a note. So there you go. Okay. So what happens is like this, that the story goes like this. There was a widow who had 2 sons. She was the widow of Ovadia. And Ovadia was a very, very special guy who, I want to read this, Ovadia, that Ovadia, when it was forbidden, of course, to study Torah, what did Ovadia do? Ovadia was the guy who took all of his money, he bought oil and lamps, and he lit up the caves of the 100 prophets that had to hide from the wicked king Achab and Jezebel. This is the story. She was his wife. This was 300 years before the first temple was destroyed. Now, so the wife, the widow now, is left penniless. Her husband used up all their money to save the prophets. He was a special person. So her two sons were being taken away because there was debt. And in those days, if you couldn't pay your debt, they took your children as slaves. So her two sons are now being taken away into slavery because that she's in debt. So she runs to Elisha and she says, Elisha, you have to help me. My two sons are going to be taken to slavery. I'm penniless. So Elisha says to her, and I want to quote from the Haftorah, what can I do for you? What do you have in your home? She responds, your maidservant has nothing in the house but a cruse of oil. So he says to her, okay, go borrow empty vessels, Tupperware, whatever, from all your neighbors and friends, bring them into your house, close the door, shut the door, and start filling every vessel with oil from your little bottle of oil. And that's what she does. She goes to all the neighbors. She collects all the as many as they'll loan her, pots and pans and Tupperware and everything and anything, Pyrex. She goes back into the house. She takes her little cruse of oil. It's almost like the miracle of Hanukkah with the little bit of oil. And she starts pouring it into vessels. And as many vessels as she has, there's somehow miraculously enough oil. She fills and fills and fills and fills until every single vessel, hundreds of vessels are now filled with oil. She doesn't know how it's even happening. It keeps pouring. She finishes the filling every vessel that she borrows. So now she goes back to Elisha and she says, what should I do now?
Sell them.
Exactly. He says, pay off the debt so your sons are now free and use the rest of the money to support yourself for the rest of your life, because that's how much oil she had. She became now almost wealthy from this oil. And this miracle saves her and her family. This is a beautiful story. This is a beautiful story. This is a beautiful story. But you know that every story in the Haftorah is not just a story. Every story in the Torah is not just a story that tells our history, teaches us a lesson, teaches us what to do. Every story in the Torah is eternal, which means living in this year, 2024, become 2025, what is in this story of Elisha that we can apply to our modern day lives as American Jews living here? What's in the story? You could say it is a beautiful story, and it is important for us to know our history, and it's important to know who Elisha was, right? If I just stopped here, wouldn't you say, wow, what a beautiful Haftorah. Look how the miracle saved her life. It's a beautiful story. But what does it have to do with us? What is the lesson for us? And I want to share a lesson, but first I'm going to ask you what you think based on the Zohar, which is the book of splendor, which is the book of Kabbalah. The Kabbalah takes this story and shows us how this is really our story. But before we do that, I want to ask you what you think. Does anybody here want to share an insight or an idea of how this story is your story? Fine, it's okay. That's why we're having a class together. So there's a beautiful intro to this based on Kabbalah. By the way, Kabbalah, for those, a refresher course. What is Kabbalah? Kabbalah is the esoteric secrets of the Torah given at Sinai. We know that the whole Torah in its totality was written by God, given by God at Sinai, and taught and transmitted through Moses, and then Moses throughout the generations, from generation to generation, and then written down because the Jews were being dispersed. So now we needed a written the oral tradition had to also be written down. It wasn't enough to give it over. So people like to say, oh, this only was given at Sinai. Everything else is subject to interpretation. The answer is no. Every single part of the book of the prophets, the 5 books of Moses, were given at Sinai, taught and transmitted through Moses, our teacher, Moshe Yeshua, Yeshua Nevi'im, the Zakanim, Lanshe Knesset Agdayla, which means Moses through Joshua, Joshua to the prophets to the men of the great assembly, and then it started to be written down so that it should not get lost, that we should have it, because the Jews were being, spread out all over the world because of the exile and the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. So what is the story here? So stories, as a preface, I'll tell a story. There was a great Lubavitcher Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe who wrote the Tanya, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Ladi, is known as the Alter Rebbe. And the story is a young man comes to him and says, Rebbe, I need your help. What's the problem? He says, Rebbe, I feel totally uninspired. My life lacks meaning. I'm numb. I'm frozen. I'm apathetic towards everything in my life. I don't feel connected to God, to my soul, to my mission, to who I am. That's what he tells the Alter Rebbe. What should I do? What should I do? What should I do? Now, this is really a very common story. This is a common story that happens to us in our lives. We're married. We look across the table at our spouses, at our husbands or our wives, and I fell out of love. I'm out of love. I don't feel passion anymore. I don't feel I'm connected to him or her anymore. I don't feel excitement in the relationship anymore. I feel very disconnected. We look at our children, I love my children, but you know what? Gay back. I really don't feel anymore. I want to talk to you. I don't feel, of course you love your child, but you feel a disconnect from those you love and those who are close to you. And you feel apathetic. They tell you your problems and you're like, just get off the phone. So every person, every human being, and again, I could only speak for myself, we go through moments when we feel uninspired. We lack passion. You don't want to even get out of bed in the morning sometimes. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? You feel, like the young man said, I feel numb, I feel frozen, I feel uninspired, I feel apathetic. I mean, I'm sure we all have those days and moments and months. Hopefully they don't last very long. What do? You're disconnected. Says the Kabbalah, this is the story of our lives. God in the relationship is the husband, the groom. The Jewish people are the bride. We're the women, whether you're a man or woman in the relationship. We wake up in the morning and we say, I don't feel God. I don't believe anymore. I don't have that strong faith in God anymore. I'm disconnected from my soul, my mission, my life. I don't feel like I want to do anything. I don't want to feel like I want to do mitzvahs. I don't feel like I want to do anything that's in the Torah. I just feel very, very alienated and disconnected. You're honest with yourself. That's how you're feeling. You're disconnected from your husband, from God, in this metaphor, in the Kabbalah, in the Zohar. Says God to you, your soul, which comes to you and says, is there nothing in your home? Do you have anything left? Do you have anything in your house?
Right.
And you say, no, not really, but a little cruse of oil. Oil is symbolic of the soul. Now, you could wake up in the morning and say, I don't have a godly soul. I was not created in God's image, but I don't have a part of God in myself. You could deny it all, but you have a cruse of oil. Whether you acknowledge it or not, it's buried there inside of you. Because otherwise you wouldn't exist. You'd be down under. Oil is symbolic of the soul. Why? Because what is oil? Oil doesn't mix with anything. Take 5 drops of oil and put it into a gallon of water and try to make the oil dissipate. Come back, the oil will rise to the top.
Like salad dressing.
Oil is greasy, it's slick. You know an oil spill on the highway, you know how long it takes them to clean it up? Because oil doesn't mix. That is the soul of God. You could bury it, you could hide it, it will rise to the top. So this God, the husband, God says to the soul, says to the person, there's nothing left. You have nothing in your house. And there's not even one iota of something left. And they say, not really, but a little bit of oil. So God says, so take that little bit of oil and start pouring it into vessels. You may not feel it, but act. You do acts of kindness, acts of mitzvahs. Start acting. Even though you're not inspired, make believe, fake it till you make it. That idea. Start taking that little bit of oil, what's left inside of you, and do something with it. Get out of bed, do an act of kindness, call a friend, give tzedakah, volunteer in a soup kitchen, do a mitzvah. Pray, choose any of your mitzvahs, prayer, kosher, tzedakah, Shabbos, kindness, charity. Act upon it. You may not feel it, but take that oil and start pouring it, utilizing it, putting it into vessels. And you're doing it behind closed doors because this is something me, myself, and I. You're not standing out in the marketplace announcing it. It's something personal here. And when you act lovingly, you'll feel love. When you're a husband, you're estranged from your wife, wash the dishes, babysit the kids, give them the best, do the homework. If you're the wife, make him a lunch, call him during work, tell him how much you love him, tell him how much you miss him, even though you're not feeling it. Act lovingly will bring you to feeling love. But the story is saying actions bring us back to where we're meant to be. You have to act. It's the actions will bring you back to reconnect to your soul, to God, to your mission in life. It's the action, the pouring of the oil into the vessels will bring you back to that wealth where you're meant to be. That's why it says, if you're having a terrible, horrible day, do something for somebody else. You'll say, what do you mean? I should do for me. You'll do for you. If you do for someone else, you do for you. It always makes you feel better. I'll share a personal story. I might have shared it, so excuse me if I did already. I was having a horrible day. I had a meeting. Everything could go wrong. I put on my stockings, there's a big run. I put on my shoe, there's something there. I get in that high, now this was the killer. I don't even know. I remember it's so painfully. I get in the car, there isn't even 1 ounce of gas. How could my family do that to me? I say to myself. So I zip out of the driveway. I'm in a horrible mood. And I zip into the gas station. And then this was the clincher. I put in my credit card. It said, go inside. Machine is not working. Ever happened to you?
No.
I go in the store, the convenience store. I tell the guy, can I please get some gas? I'm looking at my watch. I'm like, this day's ruined. Anyway, I look up and I see Teddy. Who's Teddy? Teddy is a young, a woman that participates in Circle of Friends, the program I run for adults with special needs. And Teddy is in the convenience store with her walker. And she notices me. She says, hi, Freida. And I'm like, good morning, Teddy. Why are you here? She says, I love to get a coffee from the convenience store. I live a few blocks down. I walk and I buy myself a coffee. I'm like, that's amazing, Teddy. So I say to Teddy, Teddy, I'm driving that way. Can I give you a lift home? She says, well, I usually don't go with strangers, but because I know you, you can give me a lift home. So I walk her over to my car. I take the walker. We put it in with her coffee. And the few blocks I'm chatting with her. And suddenly, I don't know what happens to me. I'm laughing. I'm giggling. I'm a new person. I bring her to the house. I walk her in. Her caregiver is there. And I'm like, here, I'm Freida. I'm bringing Teddy home. Everything's good. And I go to my meeting, whistling, smiling. My whole day was transformed. you do something for someone else, it changes your life. It changes your day. It changes your moment. And this story always reminds me. I always remind myself of the story, and it makes me smile because I see how just such a silly story, how it just changed my day. And nothing mattered anymore that day. Everything went perfect. So this is what it is. God says, you're feeling unhappy, you're feeling uninspired, you feel like you just want to crawl under your covers, you don't want to connect with anyone anymore, you're done. Do something. Take that little bit of oil that's in your home, that's inside of you, and start pouring, start acting on it. And that will bring out feelings and inspiration and so on. This is the Haftorah. This is what the Kabbalah is telling us. That there's always something in you that is a resource, is a last resort, if you want to say it, that can get you back to where you have to be, because the soul, like oil, can never be subdued. It's always there waiting, waiting. So this is the story of the Haftorah, of this week's Torah portion by Vayera. So I very much wanted to share more Haftorahs, because throughout the years of our classes, I haven't shared so many Haftorahs, there's no time. We're always talking about the Torah portion. But I do want to end off with a little bit of the Torah portion, because it's a very, very, very complicated Torah portion. It is, first of all, does anybody want to say anything? Because we did a lot today. We did a lot of different topics today, which I normally try to stick to one topic. But does anybody want to add anything, say anything?
I wanted to say that what we talked about in the beginning,
Yeah.
about faith and believing in God, relates to what you just said about doing the mitzvahs. Like when you said in the beginning that you would talk about it, about later on, it relates to what we were talking about in the beginning.
Right. It's connected. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Very good. Right. Yeah, it does. It's actually everything always connects. The threads join in. I just remembered something so beautiful. Do we have another minute to go stay on this topic for one more second?
Right.
So, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you've read that book. If you haven't, amazing. He's the founder of logotherapy. And there's a whole story with the Rebbe. I'll tell next time. It's an unbelievable story. But anyway, his student with Edith Egger. Anybody read her book, The Choice?
So excited.
Right? If you haven't read it, read it. Unbelievable. She's also survived the concentration camps, and she became a student of Viktor Frankl. She studied logotherapy and became a phenomenal therapist. So she says something which I feel so connects. So she said that, what does Elijah say to the widow? How can I help you? Do you have anything in your house? So really, what is Elisha doing? He's empowering the widow. He's not saying, he could have said to her, he's a prophet. He just conducted a big miracle for her, right? He could have said, here's $1 million. Go redeem your sons. Go pay off your debt. Go buy food. You have enough to live. He makes her go get the vessels, take the oil, the little bit of oil in her house. You notice how she has to act in this process. It's not like, I'm going to give you the solution and then go. That doesn't give a person empowerment, leadership, or independence. So Edith Egger describes how she does therapy for people. And basically, the whole thing of logotherapy is man's search for meaning, that if there's meaning in your life and you can find meaning, you can survive anything. Okay, another time for that discussion. So she says, whenever a patient used to come to her, she would say, what can I do for you? Why are you in my office? What can I do for you? She says, then I realized, totally wrong approach. She always said, she started to change it. How can I help you? In other words, I'm here to help you. You're going to be the one doing the work. I'm just here to help you, which is what Elisha says. How can I help you? Is there anything in your house? She's empowering, she said. So it gave her patients 3 things. 1, empowerment. 2, a personal connection. And 3, telling them that they're the ones who are going to save themselves, help themselves. She's just there as an assistant to help them, but they're the ones doing the work. She said it changed the whole way she does her therapy, because now the patient didn't come in and say, well, the therapist is going to do the work for me. She's going to tell me what to do, how to do it, and then I'll do it. She said her patients started to realize they have that oil within themselves. They have the resources. She's just bringing it out in them. How can I help you? She said she saw a total transformation in her work with her patients. Because the whole approach was, you're the one, can do it. I'm just here to guide you, help you, assist you, be a sounding board for you. That's the cruise of oil. It's very easy. You know, I'm a mother. Whenever my kids call me, I right away have a solution to the problem. And they go, Mom, take a step back. We didn't ask for a solution. We just wanted a sounding board. We wanted a kvetch. We wanted to use you as a listening tool. You don't need to solve my problem right away. In other words, by being a sounding board, you allow the other person to kind of discover their little oil. Because they're talking it out, you're listening, and then slowly we should, oh, yeah, that's what I should be doing. Instead of the mother said, you know what you should be doing? That's what you should be doing. You know what you should tell them? That's what you should tell them. Look, all our mothers did it to us. My mother does it to me all the time. She's also solving all my problems. And I do it to my kids. And we always like to say, Ma, you know, could you just listen for a second? So this is what the story also of Alicia is, that you empowering the other person instead of feeling, and then they're going to have to keep calling you because they're dependent on every answer that you're giving them. So we only have a few more minutes. Does anybody want to say anything before I just discuss one more little thing in the Torah portion that's just
Said it was complicated.
it is complicated. It is complicated, but you know,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I will say that if you say the wrong thing with your kids, you'll have another chance soon enough.
They're forgiving. Children are forgiving. Yeah. Yeah, thank God. The stranger is not always so forgiving, but children are forgiving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Torah portion is really so many discussions. You have the analogy of angels. Do we believe in angels? That's a whole lecture in itself. I was going to almost do that, but then other stuff came in that I found. I try to choose what resonates with me. Then you have the story where God tells Abraham he's destroying Sodom, totally. And Abraham pleads for them, but to no avail because they deserve destruction. And then the ending of this Torah portion and the last of the 10 tests of Abraham is where he's told to bring his son, who knows, Isaac, as a
Sacrifice.
Change the word. Offering.
Offering.
That's what I wanted to bring up. Sorry, I didn't mean to come across critical. Nowhere does it say sacrifice. It says offering. Nowhere did you notice, if you look at the text, does it say that God tells Abraham to kill his son? He said, bring him as an olah, which is an offering. Now, nowadays, you know that in the beginning of time, the firstborn son was supposed to be the priest in the Holy Temple. The firstborn sons, they were given the privilege to be the priests in the temple. When they sinned with the golden calf, God took away that privilege and gave it to the tribe of Levi to be the Kohanim and the Leviim in the temple, because the firstborn sons worshipped idolatry after the giving of the Torah. So they lost their privilege. So what do we do now when someone has a firstborn son born naturally, natural birth, not a cesarean or after a miscarriage and so on? There is a ceremony 30 days later called Pidin Aben, redemption of the firstborn. What do? You make a little party, you call in a Kohen, a priest, a Jewish priest, and there's a ceremony with shekels, and you basically say a prayer. Listen, my son was meant to be in the temple, work in the temple. But because of the sin of the golden calf, I'm redeeming my son. My son is no longer has the obligation to work in the temple, and you give the Kohen the money. It's a beautiful ceremony with jewelry. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. But remember, it's a metaphor. When you say I'm redeeming my son, and if you don't give the Kohen the money, does your son get taken away? Of course not. So the same thing. God says to Abraham, bring your son who you love, and bring him as an offering. But now when we are in the passage, and I'll read it to you in Hebrew as a proof, nowhere does it say, V'ha'alehu la'ayla. Rashi says, Rashi, the classic commentary, says, nowhere did it say to shacht him, to kill him, to slaughter him. God never wanted human sacrifice, only to bring him as an offering, symbolically as an offering. So God was testing Abram to see if he's going to bring his son as an offering, but not to kill him on the altar. So we have to understand this very, very importantly, that God never said, kill your son. God said, bring your son as an offering. Abraham inferred that this is what God wanted, but he was wrong. How do we know? Because as he's about to take out his knife, the angel comes down and says, stop. God does not want you to kill your son. This was a test. So just to clarify very importantly here, that God never, 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 never wanted human sacrifice. So let me ask you a question now. Why did God tell Abraham to bring his son as an offering? On the newspaper, it's going to say that. On the front page of the New Canaan News, it's going to say, God asks Abraham to bring his son as an offering. Why go through the whole test? Does anybody know? And especially God abhors human sacrifice. It's a horrific, horrific sin to kill another human being. It's horrible. Where in Jewish life did we ever have the concept of human sacrifice? It's against morality, ethics, not only for Jews, for anyone in the world. You're not allowed to kill. It's one of the 7 Noahide laws, do not kill. So why would God even make this as a test? So first of all, we want to clarify again that nowhere, Rashi points out, does it say kill your son. It says bring as an offering, which can also mean like a gift. Like remember the story with Hannah. He says to God, if you give me a child, I will dedicate him to God. What did she mean? She's going to kill him? Dedicate where he would serve God. And he became Samuel the prophet. Kill him? God doesn't want, that's not called a gift. Like in the pagan religion, oh, we don't have rain, we take our child, we sacrifice. Oh, there's a plague, we're going to sacrifice 10 bodies, 10 people from our tribe. It's abhorrent to do that in the eyes of God and in the eyes of humanity. So there's two very beautiful insights I want to share. One is I've shared it in the past, but I feel it's so important to reiterate that when you look at the matriarchs and the patriarchs, Maisa Avai Simin Labanim, what made them the matriarchs and the patriarchs? Why wasn't Moses a patriarch? He was the greatest of all. Moses gave the Torah. Shouldn't he also be a patriarch? But there's a differentiation here. The matriarchs and the patriarchs is explained, their actions, their lives paved the road for all generations. Everything they did cut through the energies for all generations. And I'll explain what that means. Imagine you have a jungle and you want to make a path and you need a path over the river. So comes a group of explorers, they cut through the jungle, they build a bridge, they make a roadway. Now everyone can go very easily. The matriarchs and the patriarchs were the initial explorers. They paved the way spiritually and created the energies for all generations to accomplish things in the future that could never have been accomplished otherwise. And I'll explain what I mean. When Abraham shows that level of self-sacrifice, where God says, take your son and bring him as an offering, and he thinks he's meant to kill his son, and he brings his son, even though God promised him in the previous Torah portion, your children will be like the stars in the sky, the sands on the beach, as many as that. I'm going to give you the promised land, the land of Israel, for all generations. How do you make a promise and then tell you that your only child of Abraham and Sarah, who's supposed to be the father of the next generation, that you're going to kill him? How does that even make sense? But yeah, Adam doesn't even question. He brings his son to the altar, and God says, no, that's not what I wanted from you. So when Abraham was able to exhibit such a high level of self-sacrifice, without questioning, that cut through the metaphysical, spiritual energy of self-sacrifice for all generations. You wonder, how did a Jew march into the gas chambers singing Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shalema Be'vias HaMashiach, I believe in God and the coming of the Messiah? Really? Really? I would march in cursing, yelling, screaming. Why'd you do this to me? The Jews marched into the gas chambers, calling out to God, saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Where did they get that from? Because Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Rachel and Leah and Jacob showed levels of self-sacrifice that created an energy, a DNA that is transmitted from generation to generation and allows us to have self-sacrifice as needed. It's in our DNA because our matriarchs and patriarchs had it. You don't have blonde hair because you used Clear All 101. You have blonde hair, your mother or father, somebody had blonde hair. Blue eyes, green eyes. The matriarchs and patriarchs, you know why they're the matriarchs and patriarchs? Because they cut through the energies and created those sparks that we could tap into now in our lives. If you ever wonder if you're working on your own energies, you're not. You're working on the energies of the previous generations. Your Bubby, your Zaidi, your Abraham, and your Sarah. So Avram had to display a level of self-sacrifice that was above human nature. Would anyone fault him if he said to God, no, God, no, thank you. You just promised me my one and only son is going to inherit. I'm not doing what you say. Find another culprit. Find someone else to do the job. No, thank you. The level of self-sacrifice had to be one that can cut through, again, the layers and layers of the universe and create that energy that we could tap into in our lives. And that's why we're able to be who we are, because of our forefathers and foremothers. If you remember our class on Rebecca, she tells her son Jacob to put on Esau's clothing. Remember the hunting clothing and take the blessings. And you say, why did he have to lie? Why did he have to put on his brother's hunting clothes? He could have said, Dad, listen, Esau doesn't deserve the blessings. He's a hunter, he's a killer, he's a murderer. Give me the blessing. He doesn't deserve it. He's going to squander the wealth. He's a philanderer, he's a gambler, he's an addict. He could have just said the truth. He had to put on the clothing of his brother because he had to create the energy that there will be a generation of Jews that will look like his brother. They will be wearing the hunter's clothing. In other words, what I'm illustrating based on Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, is that everything done by the matriarchs and patriarchs is not because they had a fault in their personality. They didn't know what to do. They were not only acting in the moment, they were paving the roadway for all of us, for future generations, to be able to be who we are today. And to bring it all together, to tap into our cruise of oil, even when we're all over the world, assimilated, and so on. That oil is always there. The pintele yid, we call it in Yiddish, the spark of the godly soul that resides within us, that never, never goes away. And that's why when you think of Jewish therapy, Jewish life, no matter what trauma you go through, what pain, what abuse, you always can go back to that place, whether Freud called it the yid, a place that's untouched, that never, never can be destroyed, that can never, never be broken, can never be hurt. That piece of the godly soul, no matter what happens to you, will always be there for you. And the trick is, at times, you have to go back and back and back to tap into that moment in time when you were innocent, when you were pure, when you were untouched by the world and its horrors and pain and traumas and hate and so on. So the story of the matriarchs and patriarchs is our story. It continues and it continues. So to sum it all up, there's so much to sum up. God does never, ever want human sacrifice. Everything that happens is a lesson for all generations. And as a matter of fact, one more little tidbit, and then I'll let everyone go because we're over time, is if you look at the wording in the Torah, the first time we meet Abraham, God says, Lach lecha, go for yourself, leave your land, artzecha, maladetcha, beis avicha, leave your father's land, the home of your father. And now when God tells him to bring Yitzchak, he again uses the word lech lecha, go and bring your son. So the Torah says a very beautiful insight. The fact that here the final test and the first test uses the same word, leave your father's house. Why do you have to tell him to leave his father's house? If he tells him to leave his land, leave his country, you're leaving your father's house. He doesn't have to say, Diane, leave Bermuda Road. If God tells you to leave Connecticut, you're leaving your house, you're leaving Bermuda Road, right? Because God was telling us, no parent is owned by their father, their child. No child is owned by their parent. The whole reason paganism, human sacrifices, where parents said, I own my child, I can sacrifice him. I own my wife, I can kill her. God set the rules of morality and ethics. You don't own your child. You gave birth to your child. I own your child. All the children are my children. You can't sacrifice your child because you gave birth to that child. No, 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 no. God set a precedence with Abraham. Leave your father's house. And here he says to him again, Lech lecha. You don't own your child. I own your child. So this correlation of the two goings, God is showing the world, you don't own somebody else, even if they're your child. You have no rights to your child, to hurt your child, abuse your child, sacrifice your child. You are there to nurture your child, love your child, raise your child, support your child, but never, never, never hurt your child. The child is my child. So again, the Torah, the human sacrifices, that's why human sacrifice, they don't realize you don't own. A person is not human property. It's your God's human being. That's why life is sacred. So we'll end with this, that, of course, that God doesn't want human sacrifice, but we'll end the thought is that there's always more to what meets the eye. You just have to be open to it and realize that everything comes from God. That's trust in God. And of course, faith in God, belief in God. And the final thing to say is that you have to act. You have to do. You have to wake up in the morning and see, what can I do today for somebody else? And when you do for somebody else, you do for yourself. Which doesn't mean you shouldn't go for manicure, pedicure, massages, a nice new outfit. Let's not push it too far. So I want to wish everybody a wonderful week, a good week. And the action that we should all do as Jewish women is light Shabbos candles.